There's about $2 billion in backlog for maintenance.
I think it's a little more than $2 billion.
The National Zoo paid China $10 million to loan the giant pandas for 10 years.
We would like to have the pandas back.
Human brains from deceased black and indigenous people.
You had to settle a lawsuit. Creatures at the zoo.
Whiteness, assumptions about white culture, anti-racial propaganda.
You know the number of drag shows that the Smithsonian has hosted in the last 3 years? How does hosting drag shows for children help the Smithsonian achieve their mission?
The original Cheesehead.
Green Bay Packers, which my Giants defeated.
But I will tell you, when I saw this exhibit in 2020 that talked about whiteness in 2020, here we are, we're trying to have a society that rather than having all these silos and everybody being told that you're in privilege, you're in this, you're in that, and trying to pull things together, partisan politics is now trying to divide us. And I'm going to go through this, and this is just baffling to me. This is in the Smithsonian, assumptions about white culture. And it says rugged individualism, family structure, emphasis on scientific method, history, Protestant work ethic, religion, no tolerance from deviation from a single God concept. This is absolute anti-racial propaganda. Why would anything like this be in the Smithsonian Institute?
Now, it's my understanding, what I think you're seeing, I can't really see it, is
you should be very well versed in this. You were the head of the Smithsonian at the time.
No, let me explain. What it is there was a document that is the whiteness document that was put up online that I took down immediately because I think that the document itself was wrong and flawed. I do think, however, it's important for the Smithsonian to help the country grapple with questions of race. So I'm not going to run away from that. But I agree with you very much that that document is not the kind of document that should be at the Smithsonian, and if it's what I think it is, I pulled that down.
How does this help us with race?
That's why I pulled it down.
All it does is divide us. This is divisive language saying that white people, we don't tolerate any deviation except a single God concept.
Like I said,
how is that helpful? I don't understand that. I wish someone could explain that to me.
I pulled that down.
It's not white people, it's not black people, it's not Latino people. We're Americans. And this is really, it hurts my heart because I think instead of us coming together in the last several years, we have formed more silos based upon the amount of melanin in our skin than have ever been seen in our history. And it is just, it is pathetic that the bastion of history in our nation, the Smithsonian Institution, is reinforcing those things. So I'm just sad about that.
You know the number of drag shows that the Smithsonian has hosted in the last 3 years?
No, I don't.
6. And 4 of those were targeted at children. Going back to June 27th of 2020, an online event at the American Art Museum listed under the Kids and Families category, a virtual drag queen story time. Ruth brings fun for the whole family as she reads classic nursery rhymes and tales for children. June 5th, 21. June 18th, 21, a virtual drag queen art bingo night. June 4th of 22, another event targeted at children. My question is this, how does hosting drag shows for children help the Smithsonian achieve their mission of catalyzing public engagement and sparking curiosity by learning by connecting the knowledge, resources, and expertise of the Smithsonian with vital network of cultural and educational organizations? What culture is exposing children to overly sexual material appropriate?
I think it's not appropriate to expose children to drag shows. I'm surprised, and I will look into that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The most recent one was actually June 23rd of 23 at the American.
But that was geared not to children at all, is my understanding, in New York City.
But how is that actually relevant to the educational aspect? I mean, even if it's not to children, why are we talking about that issue?
I think
there's many other things that we should be looking at.
And we are doing so much more. That is a small part of whatever we do. And the reality is that the Smithsonian is trying to make sure that it embraces the totality of who we are as Americans. But this is not the major part of what we do at all.
Well, I appreciate that it's not a major part, thankfully. I recognize that. I think that certainly the targeting of children is completely inappropriate, and I appreciate your opportunity to look into that, and I look forward to hearing a follow-up from you on that. Now, to pivot, well, let me also ask one last question. Were there any taxpayer funds used for those shows that you're aware of?
I have to look into that. I know that Smithsonian resources are used in a variety of ways, but I'm not sure.
Thank you for that. Pivoting now, how does the Smithsonian plan to ensure that the Women's History Museum represents a wide diversity of thought and perspectives among American women and avoid engaging in progressive identity politics? And what are the sort of specific plans or initiatives that you're looking forward to?
The goal of the Women's Museum is to explore the history of women by helping people recognize in new ways the names they know, to find new stories that they don't know anything about, but to basically say that we want to use women's history as a lens to understand what it means to be an American, to see it through the eyes of women. I think that we are clear that as we move forward, we'll hire scholars and curators and begin to develop what are the ideas we will explore. That's what's coming, that's in the future. My goal is to recognize that we have to tell a broader story. But my goal is to make sure that this is a story shaped by scholarship that helps us understand the story of women in this country.
Do you believe that you will have some of these particular initiatives included in the potential exhibits that also reflect the Christian community and the conservative women's organizations that have sort of shaped, and you actually brought some items from the suffrage movement, which I appreciate, and some of that was very much sort of a Christian-based focus. Do you plan on including those as well?
Absolutely. The Smithsonian will explore a diversity of opinions.
And so as I understand it with the Smithsonian, there is about $2 billion in backlog for maintenance of current facilities. Is that accurate?
That's correct. I think we've done a new program that gives me more assessments, but I think it's a little more than $2 billion.
Inside of that is the Smithsonian request for funding to Congress. It seems that it's only half of the broader recommended range of 2 to 4% of the physical plant's aggregate current replacement value, meaning are we falling further behind on deferred maintenance if we fulfilled the Smithsonian's request?
The plan would be that we want to make sure that we can utilize all the resources you give us. And part of what I'm trying to do now is be more strategic in terms of how we utilize our capital budgets as well as our building maintenance budget. And so therefore, we've done things like when we redone the Air and Space Museum, it's allowed us to reduce our current backlogs. But I think the reality is we need the support that you will give us, and any dollars that you give us, we do use towards building to make sure we handle the backlog as effectively as we can.
One is I understand it, the National Zoo paid China $10 million to loan the giant pandas for 10 years. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And then that loan was extended throughout that time, beginning from 2000 all the way through until this year?
We negotiate every year, yes, to extend the loan.
And is there a consideration to extend that if the pandas came back then? Is that an ongoing negotiation?
We would like to have the pandas back, and we would like to negotiate with the Chinese to do just that.
Focus for a moment or two on the Smithsonian's past practice that I mentioned of taking human brains from deceased Black and Indigenous people for study without their knowledge or consent. You mentioned in your testimony the formation of the Human Remains Task Force, which has been tasked with determining the best way to return and repatriate human remains. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how the members of the task force were selected, whether or not they're representatives from those impacted communities are part of the task force, and if you can give us a timeline for what you think is a reasonable period when the remains will be repatriated, and sort of how you measure the success of this effort, and given that timeline and given the task in front of you.
Like you, I was very upset when I learned about these human remains, and my goal was very quickly to really have a new policy that allows us to understand how we can return remains, what kind of research we should still do. And so therefore, I put together a committee of people, the best scholars, some community people, both internal and external to the Smithsonian, to help us think these issues through. to ask fundamental questions is, what is the role of human remains at the Smithsonian? What's the difference between human remains that we have consent versus that we didn't have consent? How do we return these human remains? How do we work with communities? So my goal is to get this report and to use that report to then reshape the Smithsonian policies.
I know that you've expressed your support for building both the Latino and the Women's Museum on the National Mall. I just wondered if you could give us a sense of why you believe it's important for them to be there as opposed to being in other places.
You know, building the National Museum of African American History and Culture on the National Mall was transformative, not just for the museum, but for the country. Because the National Mall is where the world comes to learn what it means to be an American. And there's something powerful about having these museums on the mall so that people can understand that they're part of the American story. Also, being on the mall ensures they get the visitation they deserve.
You had to settle a lawsuit that was filed against the museum when students were kicked out for wearing pro-life hats. It was a huge concern, still a large concern, especially when you talk about the American story. These young people have their rights to express their political beliefs as well. Now, we've been assured that this was a mistake on the part of security guards being misinformed, but is this reflective of a broader bias by the Smithsonian, or was this an isolated incident?
This is clearly an isolated incident, because think about that day, the March for Life. There were hundreds of people that went to different parts of the Smithsonian and were accepted, no problem at all. It was a mistake where we have a policy that says you cannot bring in posters and placards. But other than that, you're entering in, and the new security man made a mistake.
Smithsonian hosted an annual Folklife Festival with the United Arab Emirates Ministry of Culture and Youth as the headline sponsor. This followed an announcement in 2017 of an agreement between the Smithsonian and the UAE to collaborate on cultural content and capacity development programs. It opens the question as to why a foreign nation would be allowed to sponsor an American Folklife Festival in the first place, or as you said, the American story. And what, if any, influence the UAE had on the curatorial decisions for the Folklife Festival? Months after this festival, the Washington Post reported that U.S. intelligence officials had compiled a classified report on the UAE's attempts to influence domestic American politics. So my question is, does the Smithsonian accept money from foreign nations to fund its exhibits and events?
The Smithsonian, the Folklife Festival is one of those moments where we do a domestic program and an international program.
Okay.
And that the Smithsonian has received support from nations that are being part of the festival. What we make clear, however, is that that support has nothing to do with content. They're not involved in the decisions about what is actually shown. It really is a support to bring performers and scholars over.
Can you share some of your thoughts on that and where you're going with that 250th anniversary and what you plan to highlight?
I believe that it's crucially important for the Smithsonian to be part of the glue that helps hold the country together. And part of that is really celebrating our history, is exploring the fact that the founding fathers and mothers, the founding documents, shape not just who we are, but who the world is. And so we want to be able to celebrate that. We also want to be able to talk about America as a work in progress, that what you see are many of those challenging moments that there are people that are really trying to say, how does America live up to those ideals? How does America really build on the Declaration and the Constitution? So we want people to understand that we are going to celebrate a country. We're also going to commemorate, because we want them to understand that by looking at the past, looking at the full past, it doesn't mean that we're running away from difficult things, nor does it mean that we're really being critical of the country. What we're really saying is that America is a place that has changed over time, and part of that change has been trying to live up to those ideals.
Do you use the creatures at the zoo to see, to check into things like animal intelligence? Do you do research there?
We do a lot of different kind of research. A lot of our work with the zoo is about animal conservation. The work with the pandas are trying to make sure they were no longer endangered. We do a lot of work with cheetahs and a variety of animals. So I think that we do a lot on conservation, and then our research is used by those scientists that are exploring other aspects of animal intelligence. So in some ways, the Smithsonian is foundational to what other scientists are also doing.
Is the National Museum of the American Latino committed to telling the experience Latin Americans faced and their contributions to our nation?
There is no doubt that is our priority. The best way I can explain that to you is that the Molina Gallery really ought to be a testing place, that it should be a series of 8 or 9 or 10 exhibitions that happen before the building is up so that we actually make sure that we've made the mid-course corrections we need to tell the stories we want to do.
As a former museum director yourself, how will you address concerns about political bias in exhibits?
Part of it is by putting together a diverse group of scholars that will help shape what the museum will do. Secondly, I've created a process where we vet exhibitions. Traditionally, we vet exhibitions early in the process, conceptually. What I've done is add a second bounce that allows us to look more concretely at exhibits, the artifacts you use, the words that are written. So that'll also help us ensure that we're making sure that the museum is telling the story from a nonpartisan point of view.
We know you brought 5 items out of a collection of about 137 million items, and one of them, of course, has caught my attention because I'm told it's the original cheesehead. I'd love to yield you 5 minutes or more if you need, just so you can walk through the 5 unique items you brought before us, because the history and the richness that the Smithsonian Institution has in its collection is just so incredibly unique. And so if you will, we'll give you a few minutes just to describe the 5 items before us.
Well, the Smithsonian has 155 million objects in its collection, so we wanted to give you a few that you could look at. I mean, I think that obviously the Wisconsin cheesehead from 1990, crucially important because it really is a symbol of Wisconsin. It's a symbol of the Green Bay Packers, which my Giants defeated, but it is it is really an example of the.
I did consider reclaiming my time at that moment, but continue on.
You know, so that's really important. I think the other thing is that here you have is an M1 helmet. This was really used by a Puerto Rican brigade who really won sort of valor fighting in the Korean War, and we wanted to be able to use that to tell that story. Also, you have pins here that are jailed for freedom pendants, which were really about women's suffrage. Women demanding that they had the right to vote, and they were then sort of arrested, and these are pins to commemorate that. We also have Mary Todd Lincoln's Morning Watch. So when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Mary Todd Lincoln, as you would expect, was devastated. And this watch was given to her as a way to always make sure that she kept Abe Lincoln close. And so we have an array of things that really give you a different story. And the last piece is a piece of trench art from World War I. As you know, during the war, there were these moments of real terror and moments of boredom. And many of the soldiers created art. And this is a piece that was created out of shells that is in the shape of a book that was really used to store material. But again, it just demonstrates the array of things that are part of the Smithsonian collections. So I would say to you that anytime you want to come and have me give you my tour of Smithsonian collections, please let me know.